with some needles and thread, and worsted and gave her some money which was left from the sale of the chickens, after he had made the purchases. He also bought a new suit for Edward and Humphrey, and a gun, which was much approved of by Humphrey, as it had a larger bore and carried a heavier bullet than either Jacob's or Edward's, and there was a white kitten for Alice and Edith. There was no news, only that the Levellers had opposed Cromwell, and he had put them down with the other troops, and Jacob said that it appeared that they were all squabbling and fighting with each other. Time passed. The month of November came on without anything to disturb the daily employments of the family in the forest, when one evening Jacob, who had returned from hunting with Edward, the first time they had been out since the season commenced, told Alice that she must do all she could to give them a good dinner the next day, as it was to be a feast. "Why so, Jacob?" "If you cannot guess, I won't tell you till the time comes," replied Jacob. "Well, then, Humphrey must help us," replied Alice, "and we will do what we can. I will try, now that we have some meat, to make a grand dinner." Alice made all the preparations, and had for dinner the next day a piece of baked venison, a venison stew, a pair of roast chickens, and an apple pie, which for them was a very grand dinner indeed. And it was very well dressed, for Jacob had taught her to cook, and by degrees she improved upon Jacob's instruction. Humphrey was quite as clever at it as she was, and little Edith was very useful, as she plucked the fowls and watched the things while they were cooking. "And now I'll tell you," said Jacob, after saying grace, "why I asked you for a feast this day. It is because exactly on this day twelvemonth I brought you all to the cottage. Now you know." "I did not know it, certainly, but I dare say you are right," replied Edward. "And now, children, tell me," said Jacob, "has not this year passed very quickly and very happily? Quite as quickly and quite as happily as if you had been staying at Arnwood?" "Yes, more so," replied Humphrey, "for then very often I did not know what to do to amuse myself, and since I have been here the days have always been too short." "I agree with Humphrey," said Edward. "And I am sure I do," replied Alice. "I'm always busy and always happy, and I'm never scolded about dirtying my clothes or tearing them, as I used to be." "And what does little Edith say?" "I like to help Alice, and I like to play with the kitten," replied Edith. "Well, my children," said Jacob, "depend upon it, you are most happy when your days pass quickest, and that is only the case when you have plenty to do. Here you are in peace and safety, and may it please God that you may continue so. We want very few things in this world, that is, we really want very few things, although we wish and sigh for many. You have health and spirits, which are the greatest blessings in life. Who would believe, to look at you all, that you were the same children that I brought away from Arnwood? You were then very different from what you are now. You are strong and healthy, rosy and brown, instead of being fair and delicate. Look at your sisters, Edward. Do you think that any of your former friends, do you think that Martha, who had the care of them, would know them?" Edward smiled and said, "Certainly not, especially in their present dresses." "Nor would, I think, Humphrey be known again. You, Edward, were always a stout boy, and except that you have grown very much, and are more brown, there is no great difference. You would be known again, even in your present forester's dress. But what I say is, that we ought to be thankful to the Almighty that you, instead of being burned in your beds, have found health, and happiness, and security, in a forester's hut. And I ought to be, and am most thankful to Heaven, that it has pleased it to spare my life, and enable me to teach you all the present, how to gain your own livelihoods after I am called away. I have been able so far to fulfill my promise to your noble father, and you know not what a heavy load on my mind is lessened every day, as I see each day that you are more and more able to provide for yourselves. God bless you, dear children, and may you live to see many returns, and happy returns of the day." And Jacob was so much moved as he said this, that a tear was seen rolling down his furrowed cheek. The second winter now came on. Jacob and Edward went out hunting usually about twice a week, for the old forester complained of stiffness and rheumatism, and not feeling so active as he used to be. Humphrey now accompanied Edward perhaps one day in the week, but not more, and they seldom returned without having procured venison, for Edward knew his business well, and no longer needed the advice of Jacob. As the winter advanced, Jacob gave up going out altogether. He went to Lymington to sell the venison and procure what was necessary for the household, such as oatmeal and flour, which were the principal wants, but even these journeys fatigued him, and it was evident that the old man's constitution was breaking fast. Humphrey was always busy. One evening he was making something which puzzled them all. They asked him what it was for, but he would not tell them. "It's an experiment that I am trying," he said as he was bending a hazel stick. "If it answers, you shall know. If it does not, I've only had a little trouble for nothing. Jacob, I hope you will not forget the salt tomorrow when you go to Lymington, for my pigs are ready for killing, and we must salt the greatest part of the pork. After the legs and shoulders have lain long enough in salt, I mean to try if I cannot smoke them, and if I do, I'll then smoke some bacon. Won't that be jolly, Alice? Won't you like to have a great piece of bacon hanging up there, and only have to get on a stool to cut off what you want, when Edward and I have come home hungry, and you've nothing to give us to eat? I shall be very glad to have it, and I think so will you too, by the way you talk." "I shall, I assure you. Jacob, didn't you say the ash sticks were the best to smoke bacon with?" "Yes, boy. When you are ready, I'll tell you how to manage. My poor mother used to smoke very well up this very chimney." "I think that will do," said Humphrey, letting his hazel stick spring up after he had bent it down. "But tomorrow I shall find out." "But what is it for, Humphrey?" said Edith. "Go away, Puss, and play with your kitten," replied Humphrey, putting away his tools and his materials in a corner. "I've a great deal on my hands now, but I must kill my pigs before I think of anything else." The next day Jacob took the venison into Lymington, and brought back the salt and other articles required. The pigs were then killed and salted down under Jacob's directions. His rheumatism did not allow him to assist, but Humphrey and Edward rubbed in the salt, and Alice took the pieces of pork away to the tub when they were finished. Humphrey had been out the day before with the unknown article he had been so long about. The next morning he went out early before breakfast, and when he returned he brought a hare in his hand, which he laid on the table. "There," said he, "my spring has answered, and this is the first fruits of it. Now I'll make some more, and we will have something by way of a change for dinner." They were very much pleased with Humphrey's success, and he was not a little proud of it. "How did you find out how to make it?" "Why, I read in the old book of travels which Jacob brought home with him last summer, of people catching rabbits and hares in some way like this. I could not make it out exactly, but it gave me the idea." We ought to have told the reader that Jacob had more than once brought home an old book or two which he had picked up, or had been given him, and that these had been occasionally looked into by Humphrey and Edward, but only now and then, as they had too much to do to find much time for reading, although sometimes in the evening they did take them up. When it is considered how young they were, and what a practical and busy life they led, this cannot be surprising. End of chapter 6.